Greetings and salutations to everybody out there in podcast land. This is the Judo Suey podcast, and I'm your host, Judo Dave Roman. I'm very excited to be back behind the microphone once again to talk. Actually, this time I'm not talking all things judo. For this episode, I'm going to talk all things Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Yeah, I know, the shock and horror, right? So yeah, I wanted to go in a different direction with this particular episode because for many of you that may know or don't know or whatever the case may be, I have been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu over the past year as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu student, not just a judo guy dabbling in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu just to kind of shore up his ground game. Not with that kind of approach. I have been a dedicated student to BJJ for the past year plus or so. So I wanted to do an episode dedicated to talk about my experiences in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because I think there are a lot of takeaways that I've had. Actually, I know there's been a lot of takeaways that I've had over the past year, and I want to bring up and discuss some of those things, some of the things that are accurate, some of the things that are inaccurate when it comes to a judoka's point of view on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And to discuss all of this with me, I am bringing on my friend, my training partner, Judo Joe, a little bit later in this episode to talk about this kind of stuff. So on this episode, I'm going to talk about my experiences in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We're going to have a conversation with Judo Joe, and I want to really deep dive into some of the misconceptions that a lot of judo folks have about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Misconceptions and flat-out inaccuracies, but I also want to bring up some of the truths that some of us judo folks have about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So before I will get into any of that, maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was promotion night at Ybor City Jiu-Jitsu Club, which is where I train. So I'd like to give a special shout out to some of the people that got promoted on that night. Really, all of the people that promoted on that night and that morning. So congratulations to Austin and Randy for earning their purple belts. Congratulations to Hugo, Tom, Jack Swagger, Dave Roman, Rambo. No, not that Rambo. And Brittany for earning their blue belts. Yeah, that's right. Your ears did not deceive you. I earned my blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, hopefully I didn't forget anybody off of that list. Those are the people that I was aware of. So I want to take a moment to talk about how I feel about being promoted to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm sure those of you who follow me on Instagram or Facebook already know that I got promoted to blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I was the 69th person promoted by the club to blue belt. And I'm oh so happy about that. 69, dudes! All right. So yeah, blue belt. There's two things that I know about the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt. And they go as follows. One, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt is the black belt of quitting Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And two, if your instructor wants you to quit Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, all he's got to do is give you a blue belt. Those are not my jokes. I'm sorry if they came off flat. So yeah, I know there's a long-standing there's apparently an attrition problem in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when it comes to blue belt, but I would say that the judo black belt is the black belt of quitting judo. So it goes both ways because there's a lot of adults out there. Once they reach their shodan, they're like they think they've climbed that mountain and they're finally at the summit and it's all downhill from there. But no, that's actually not true in judo, and it's certainly not true in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, for me, it took about a year to the day for me to get promoted to blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and it's not because I was really terrible on the ground. That's just how long it took me. And, when I came into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, obviously, as many of you know, I've had 13 years experience in judo, and when I started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at Ybor City on an official capacity, and I'll explain that in a moment, I had a leg up on everybody else that was starting Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu who has not had a previous experience in martial arts or any sort of a grappling sport. And what I mean by an official capacity is being a consistent member of a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club. Now, if you want to take the very first time I stepped on the mats, then hell, it took me 20 years to earn my blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because the first exposure I had to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was back in 1999 at Boston Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It was either 1999 or 2000, I can't remember, but I know I did that for a couple of months, and then I moved to Florida. And then shortly after I moved to Florida, I met a fellow by the name of Eduardo de Lima, who ran a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club out of his garage in Clearwater, Florida. And that's where I met a fellow for the very first time. He doesn't remember this, but I met him for the first time, a fellow by the name of Joey Best. And Joey was a 3 or 4 stripe white belt at the time. And now Joey is my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor. So it's kind of cool that that somebody who I've seen as a white belt is now a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's my Jiu-Jitsu instructor. So it goes to show you that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts just don't descend out of the heavens and impart us with their knowledge of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's a long road taken. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Just like in judo, it's just a different path and a different sport. So I've been in and out of different Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu clubs really over the past 20 years, but it wasn't until 2006 that I committed to a grappling sport and way, if you want to call it that, which I do. I've been doing judo since 2006. That is my first love when it comes to grappling sports. And I still primarily consider myself a judoka, not just because I'm a Nidan, but that's just where, of the two, judo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, my passion is still with judo. But man, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a close second. And I have really come to appreciate the differences of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. However, I must say that over the years since I started doing judo, I've popped in and out of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu clubs from time to time, spent a month here, a couple months there. And I was just acting like a judo guy, just doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, trying to incorporate a little bit here and there into my game. But I would say over the past year, I have been approaching being a student not as a judo guy learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but as a person learning Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I think the mindset is a little bit different. And, speaking of mindset, I think my mindset entering Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu this time around over the past year, if there's one thing judo has helped me with over the past year when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's the mindset for training. Because at my age, middle age now, I have a more mature approach to sparring and learning and randori than I did 10 years ago. And I think the one thing that I've brought into my training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that I've taken away from judo is really having a very short memory when it comes to submissions during practice. And what I mean by that is when I do judo these days, and probably over the past 2 years or so, I literally don't care about being thrown. It does not faze me one bit. The only time I care about being thrown is when somebody is being reckless with my health and safety. That's when I really care. But other than that, like if I'm working on something specific and I get caught in a throw because I'm trying to improve my own judo, I literally don't care. I don't try and spin out. I just take the fall. I go at about a 60 to 70% pace in randori. Getting thrown does not matter to me because I've come to the conclusion that the evaluation of my judo is not done by the people who I'm training with. Which, when I got promoted to Nidan, nearly a year ago, that was my biggest takeaway from taking that test and passing a test, is that I was evaluated by somebody who knows a heck of a lot more judo than I do and can evaluate students properly. So when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I'm taking the same mindset as well, because there's two main instructors, Chris and Joey, and then there's also the beginners class instructor who's his nickname is Crucial, so I'll just leave it at that. But when it comes to sparring in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I try and make as many mistakes as possible and take as many risks as possible. Not risks with my health or other people's health, but I try things and experiment because I literally do not care about getting tapped out. Now, the one thing that makes me lose sleep during practice, if I'm rolling with somebody and I can't pass their guard, boy, do I have a rough night sleeping, because that one I can't seem to let go of. But, getting caught in submissions, I don't care about that. And I think bringing that I don't care attitude from judo in terms of getting thrown and incorporating that into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that has been a very helpful thing for me in order to develop some of my Jiu-Jitsu skills. And along those lines, I personally do not put much stock in defending the belt, because the people who I'm defending the belt against, they don't evaluate my skills. They don't evaluate me. So it doesn't matter to me what they think of my jiu-jitsu. The only thing that matters to me is what my instructors are thinking. So for me to be promoted by them is a very great honor, and I'm very proud of that. Now, I'd like to take a moment to talk about some of the things that I've learned in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu over the past year, and some of the similarities between Judo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I must say that in terms of hold downs and in terms of some of the basic movements like shrimping and escaping, and certainly submissions in the gi, we're talking about, arm bars and certain chokes, I don't think there was anything new that I've learned over the past year. And I don't mean that as a slight towards the instructors or anything like that. It's just in terms of the basics when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, a lot of the basics were already there for me. I would say about 80% of things that I was shown and seen in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I've already seen once before. But that being said, it is the level of detail and the finer points of all of these techniques that I'm really blown away at when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the way that the sport is constructed. Because, yeah, judo has a lot of nawaza, and I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't or anything like that, but the way the game is played in competition, it doesn't leave you a lot of time to set up submissions after submissions and move around in a way that you can in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in sport Jiu-Jitsu. You just don't have that kind of time. And and I'm going to get into this later. This nonsense, this idea that many people perpetrate that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has nothing new to offer, I vehemently disagree with that. But as far as individual techniques, Keisa Gatame, Yoko Shio Gatame, Juji Gatame, all the Shimewaza, all of that is there in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I think sometimes what happens with some judo guys that visit a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club, like sometimes they may just show up one day and it ends up being a class in let's say Keisa Gatame. And, the judo guy might walk away thinking, there's nothing new here. But you're wrong. Now, I'm not suggesting the Keisa Gatame itself is new, but if one were to go to a class and only see that and never ever visit again, you would really miss out on really the depth of what one can find in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Before I bring Joe on, I also wanted to talk briefly about some of the key differences in club size when it comes to judo versus Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, at least from what I can talk about in the United States and in my local area, which I believe is a reflection of what happens throughout the rest of this country and throughout many other English-speaking countries. And I'm not going to deep dive into this because I know I've already talked about this in episodes past with regards to the statistics on Google search criteria when it comes to judo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, at least in English-speaking countries. And if you haven't heard those episodes, the long story short is that when you look at the Google Trends metrics for English-speaking countries, and I'm talking primarily about Canada, the United States, the UK, and Australia, not to include other English-speaking countries, but I'm just talking about those particular countries, the growth and search interest, according to Google Trends, of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu versus Judo is really in Jiu-Jitsu's favor, and in some areas it's in Jiu-Jitsu's favor by a large margin. And the only time that Judo ever has any more interest from a Google Trend point of view over Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is during the Olympics. So every 4 years you see a spike. But by and large, in those countries, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is more popular. Now, within the United States, it's my understanding as well that Florida, which is the state that I live in, is a hotbed for really not only judo. It's not as big as California, but judo's pretty popular in Florida. But Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu apparently is a hotbed, or Florida is also a hotbed for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and in particular the Tampa Bay area, because I believe we have a few Jiu-Jitsu world champions teaching in Tampa Bay, and I'm not talking about like a blue belt world champion. I'm talking about people that have won black belt divisions at the highest level of Jiu-Jitsu competition. And most notably, I think in this area, Robson Moura teaches Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Tampa Bay. There's also Eduardo de Lima, who I believe was a multiple-time winner at the Pan American Games for Jiu-Jitsu. And, of course, Dr. Roddy Ferguson is certainly a very notable name in judo circles, but he's also – I've never rolled with him, but I'm told he's an excellent jiu-jitsu guy. And it's my understanding he recently got his, I think, 4th degree or 5th degree in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And if I'm not mistaken, he may be a Rokudan in judo now. And I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of people in the Tampa Bay area. But my overall point is what I'm trying to say is that jiu-jitsu in my local area is pretty huge. And I know it's huge in California. I know it's huge in New York. And, you know, the point that I wanted to get to, given Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu's popularity compared to judo in the United States, as far as I know, there's approximately 30,000 judoka in the United States, and if you were to, you know, divide that by 50, 50 states, of course, you've probably got about, on average, 600 judoka in every state. I know in Florida that's probably a little bit more than that, maybe anywhere between 600 to 800 judoka in Florida. But I would say in terms of jiu-jitsu practitioners, there's probably over 700 or 800 jiu-jitsu practitioners in Tampa Bay alone. And if I were to count up every single member of just my club alone, there's probably over 100 students between a variety of ranks. So the amount of training partners that I've had over the past year in jiu-jitsu is massive compared to the adult training partners that I've had in judo. It's not even close. You know, I think the most judoka I have seen on a single mat is about 30 adults, and that's usually at an open mat area. Really, the open mats that we've had at my club is the most amount of judoka I've seen in one mat space. Now, I know there are people that I've talked to over the years that are from other countries where their classes average about 50 adults per session. Now I've never seen that in my life, certainly not in the United States. I know the Florida School of Judo locally probably has about 30 adult students, but that's largely because they are affiliated with the local YMCA, which, by the way, I would like to say something unrelated to jiu-jitsu. My first judo sensei, Professor Edwin Maley, has passed away, and I just learned the news of this yesterday. And by yesterday, I'm talking about October 2nd. I received a text message from one of my longtime training partners, and Professor Maley was, he had to have been in his early to mid-90s. And he's a legendary judo figure. He was a fixture in the local Tampa Bay community for decades. He taught judo for over 70 years, and he opened up the Florida School of Judo in 1963. He was an Air Force veteran, and he's probably taught about, no less than 10,000 students throughout his time. I mean, that's probably a very conservative number. I'd venture to guess a more realistic number is like 30,000 over 70 years. It's my understanding that he started judo sometime in the late 1940s, and he served in the Air Force, as I already mentioned. And he was a pioneer in American judo in his own way. I know he used to be, I know he was friends with Gene LaBelle. He mentioned that once a long, long time ago to me. And it wouldn't surprise me if he knew Don Drager. I mean, every significant person in American judo history he probably knew and knew very well. So this is a huge loss for judo in the United States. And for those American judoka, even if you've never heard of him, rest assured he's a pioneer in American judo. There's no doubt about that in my mind. So to the Maley family, friends, and students, I offer my condolences to you. Rest in peace, Professor Maley. So where was I going with that? Yeah, class sizes. As I was saying, I've never had so many training partners on one mat in my life. And there's times where we're rolling, there's almost too many people on the mat, and we got to set people aside. And we got a pretty big mat space, in my opinion. So anyway, look, I've been babbling quite well over 20 minutes now, and I've got to bring Joe on. So there's the music, and without further ado, Mr. Joe Kaiser. Joe, welcome back to the Judo Chop Suey podcast. How you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me back again.
I really appreciate you coming back on. I wanted to bring you back on because, you know, we've been doing judo together for a long time, and we've also been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu together for the past year. As of this recording, I've been a member of the club on an official capacity for almost a year to the day. If I were to look at when I get charged my club dues, it's probably either going to be today or tomorrow. So and I get charged when I signed up. So it's probably a year to the day, just about.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring you on. I'm calling this episode the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu episode because I really want to get deep dive into our thoughts on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and the things that we kind of learn through Jiu-Jitsu and what those differences are. And I also want to delve into, because I'm getting my purple, or I've gotten my blue belt, and I'm going to be working toward my purple belt. It's going to take years, of course. And I want to kind of deep dive into some of the accuracies and flat out inaccuracies when it comes to the perceptions of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
I guess what I want to talk about is some of my thoughts on doing jiu-jitsu over the past year. You know, we've been doing a lot of training together. You've certainly helped me improve over the past year as a BJJer, if you want to call it that, a jiu-jitsu doka. I don't know what the official term is. I'll just call it a grappler. Just for the.
That works.
Yeah, that works. So over the past year, what I found interesting is I've always maintained, at least just as an observer, that the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt, in terms of knowledge and ability, is the equivalent to a sankyu in judo. Do you agree with that?
I mean, it's really kind of difficult to cross them over just because of the curriculum is different.
Right.
What I would say, one thing I will say, to me, the most important belt in jiu-jitsu, obviously other than your black belt, is your blue belt.
Interesting.
Because I think at that point you've learned all of the basics and fundamentals, right? Not saying that you've mastered them, but you've pretty much seen everything that you're going to see in its basic form at blue belt, right? Your sweep, you've worked on all the different sweeps. You've worked on transitions. You've worked on, your submissions, obviously. So to me, when you get your earning the blue belt is a big step.
Yeah.
One of the biggest, like I said, I think other than your black belt, it's probably the most important because the belts between that, your purple and your brown belt, you're really just sharpening the sword at that point. You're learning different ways to get to, where you want to be, which is ultimately, in a submission. So it's kind of like, you've learned the game of chess at that point. You know the rules. You know what needs to be done. And I, like I said, I think your next two levels, your purple and your brown, you're sharpening that technique. So I think the blue belt is very, very, very important.
I agree that the blue belt's important, but boy, I gotta tell you, when I evaluate my skills to somebody that's a purple belt, I mean, the gap is pretty big, and at least for me, and coming into jiu-jitsu, like I felt that I had pretty good ground game for a judo guy, and even with that experience, I still felt that I could hang with certainly some of the blue belts, especially when they're, closer in size and age. I can hang with them. But when I look at my skills objectively, I don't think there's a purple belt that I could objectively look at and be like, yeah, I can hang with him, because there isn't. And I think for me, there are little things that, like, certain guard passes and certain sweeps that I know I just can't do. And so I do agree with your statement that a lot of the basics at blue belt are there. So, whether that's side control or north south or mount or whatever the case may be, a lot of those basics are there. Arm bars, certainly lapel chokes and rear naked chokes, and chokes like Hadaka Jime coming right straight in and stuff like that. But I feel for myself that there's such a huge gap between blue belt and purple belt, which is why I kind of equate, for myself, I kind of equate the blue belt kind of the Sankyu, and the purple belt is kind of like the black belt in judo, like in terms of mat hours and experience and ability. That's kind of how I see it for myself. Like I can't tell you. I probably know 2 sweeps, like, say, from half guard. Actually, no, I know 3 or 4. But there's other ones that I just don't. I don't know, and I probably haven't even seen yet. And there's the other week we were working on passing the knee shield and being in somebody's half guard, and you showed me a pass that I've just never seen before. And I'd like to add, these are things that I could spend the next 20 years in judo and never see any of this if I was just doing judo alone. And I think we'll get to that subject there. But yeah, I just think that I feel in some ways I feel like, yeah, I can hang with blue belts, but then when I roll with other people, I'm like, my God, that gap is just so large between blue and purple. I see for myself why it can take maybe another 4 or 5 years before I could even get my, or earn a purple belt. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think putting it in judo terms, like you were saying, I only have 1 or 3 or 4 sweeps, but I think it's really one of those things when you look at even guys at the top level, they really only have 3 or 4 sweeps too. They're just so proficient at it. And it's one of those things where, we learn a lot of techniques, and, we drill them, and we go out and run door, and sparring and rolling, and we try to hit them. And sometimes we're like, man, I just can't pull that off. And I liken that to judo in a way. It's like there's a lot of throws that I can demonstrate, and you would think, man, you must have a really nice Tayatoshi. Well, the truth is, I don't really have a very good Tayatoshi, or at least I don't have confidence in my Tayatoshi. I can show it to you, and and I can. There's guys that I show it to, and I'm like, yeah, I wish I could do it as good as you. And I think that there's a lot of that in BJJ as well. Like I only have 1 or 2 sweeps that I like to do. I have some from half guard, from X guard, but I don't have that many either. But I just really concentrate my efforts on getting proficient at those 1 or 2 sweeps. And honestly, at some point, it's good enough. There's guys at the highest level in BJJ that really only do a couple of things. Hodger Gracie comes to mind. Mm-hmm. He's capable of doing many things. But when you watch him go out and compete, first of all, Hodger Gracie has great stand-up. He's at minimum Shodan level judo.
Interesting.
But when you watch him on the ground, he's not doing any of these crazy berimbolo, omoplatas, or he's doing what people have dubbed basic jiu-jitsu. He's just doing it at such a high level that guys know what he's going to do and they can't stop him. And, that's where I sometimes, we get discouraged a little bit, like when we're learning all these techniques in BJJ, and it's like, man, it's like when we've done a lot of like berimbolo stuff at the club, berimbolo to back take, berimbolo sweep. I'm terrible at it. I'll be honest with you. Like, there's white belts that could do that twice as good as me. But it's, at some points I'm like, man, it's frustrating. But then at other points I think to myself, I don't have to add that to my game. I have other things that I can do well, that I don't need to focus so much on this one technique. I try to do it every time, and every time, I get a little better at it. But I don't really focus too much on the amount of techniques that I can do. I guess I just focus on sharpening the ones that I've come to, be good at.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So do you think that maybe for myself going from blue belt to purple belt, that kind of should be my approach? Because I tell you, like, I think it's good to know body movements like what we practiced, berimbolo and things like that. And I see young guys, even white belts at the club, that they do things that I simply can't physically do. And it's not for lack of trying. And it's not because I'm uncoordinated, because I'm very coordinated. It's just, their range of motion, their flexibility, their energy. Like I feel like I have to find a way to neutralize that's goes toward my strengths,
Absolutely. And there was a couple of key things you said there. It's that range of motion, that flexibility, the age, our backs aren't as, not going to get in the same positions that some of these guys are going to be able to get in. And really, it's just that style. People have different styles, right? Some guys like heavy top pressure and pressure passing, and other guys like to play guard, and they feel really good on bottom, elevating and sweeping and elevating right into position to submit. And it's really two different style. There's many different styles, right, to attack in BJJ. And like, I consider myself more of a top guy with good pressure passing and good transitions. I mean, if I get on bottom, I have a couple of things. Like I said, I have a couple of sweeps, or I have a couple of escapes that I can utilize to at least get myself back to a neutral position, or maybe even get back to top position. So I think it's really, that transition like you're talking about, or that journey from blue to purple.
Yeah.
Is probably going to be more finding what you do well and just sharpening it. Setting up somebody to make them move to where you can do what you like to do. That's the big thing for me.
Yeah, and when I roll with you, and you're not just a purple belt, you're really an experienced purple belt now, and like, it's interesting when you say, when I roll with you, I get caught in a lot of things, because you set up, it's almost like chess in the sense that you set up a move 3 or 4 moves ahead. You secure, a particular grip or whatever the case may be in that sense. And that's where I'm not, just period, where I'm thinking I'm more like 1 or 2 steps ahead. If I get this grip, okay, now I'm going to try and sweep. But there's things that you do where you have a seems like a path in mind that's 4 or 5 moves ahead. It's really interesting, because sometimes let's say I have you in a really bad half guard or something. You'll put your head like on my chest, and you secure a grip, but then that's really all to set up an arm triangle that takes you another 3 or 4 movements to eventually get to. And I think it's really interesting to see, you know, where I'm at compared to what you do on the ground. And it's just, I know I'll get there eventually, but again, that's kind of what I talk about. That gap between blue belt and purple belt is really huge. I mean, from what I see.
Yeah. I mean, but like you said, you will get there. And
yeah.
It's huge, but I got to be honest, man, that's the exciting part, right? It's knowing that you're going to, like when I roll with brown belts and black belts, and even though sometimes you know what they're going to do, and you're like, they still, like you said, they're 2 or 3 steps ahead of me. And I'm like, man, that's it. I want to get to that point. And that's what the most exciting thing about that keeps us coming back, right? Is we know at some point we're not going to give up. It's not like a year from now, you're going to be like, man, purple belt's too hard. I give up. You're going to be there 4 or 5 times a week, and you're going to get your rolls in, and then you're going to start piecing together your game. Yeah. You're going to find that, like you said, the pattern that you like. You're going to secure this grip because, well, if he turns his back to me, I'm going to go S mount. But if he turns away from me, I'm going to, just step and get my hooks in. You're going to be sitting there, with your next 2 steps, plan A and plan B, and that's when it becomes really fun.
Something interesting you said, and you're right, in a year or 2 now, I'm not going to quit. Because, I've been doing grappling sports for over 13 years now, and I've had my share of injuries. One of them actually kept me out of judo for well over a year, but I came back, and now I'm doing jiu-jitsu. This is in me, grappling, judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I mean, if there was a Samba club in locally in Tampa, I check it out as well. This is in my body. This is in me. This is for life. But there is an attrition problem in jiu-jitsu, isn't there? Especially when it comes to blue belt. Isn't there? I've always heard this joke a long time ago that the Brazilian jiu-jitsu blue belt is the black belt of quitting Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Have you seen you seen that kind of attrition at that club, or do you agree that there is a drop off at blue when it comes to people sticking around for the long term?
100%.
There is.
And I think it goes back to what I was saying about it being the most important belt. The path from obviously me and you were a little bit different when we stepped on the mat for BJJ. We were already grappling. Right. So it wasn't like a foreign world to us. But guys who come in off the street, they watch UFC, or a friend tells them about this and drags them to the club, or somebody's just passing by and sees the club. Hey, I'd like to try that.
Yeah.
The guy who walks in there, or gal who walks in there with no experience, after that first class or 2, it's got to seem like the highest mountain. You see guys in there who are like purple belts, brown belts, and you see what they're doing, and then you remember, here you are on your second day, and you see some guy do a berimbolo back take to a bow and arrow choke or something.
Yeah.
And you're like, I just learned how to hip escape today.
Yeah, well, right.
You know what I mean? So what I think happens is that path to blue belt is tough. For the person straight off the street, it could be a couple years. And I think maybe sometimes when they get that they think that the path from blue to purple is the same. And they're like, maybe they lose interest. They're like, you know what? I worked hard enough. This is good enough. I want to start doing something else or whatever. I don't know what it is, but you're right. The blue belt is where, if you stay in after your blue belt and you're still coming there every day and working hard, those are the people that they're going to be all the way to black belt. They're not going to get, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't see me or you not walking out of there with a black belt someday.
One day, unless I, croak before or something like that. It might take that long till I hit 60. I personally would, my personal goal, if I were to have a goal, I would like to be a purple belt before I'm 50. That would be nice. Not that I need to put a date on it or anything, but I actually have two personal goals. I'd like to be a Sandan and at least a purple belt before I'm 50. Ideally.
And those are both well within your reach.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. So long as I train the right way, and take care of my body, which I have to be a lot more proactive at my age compared to even just 5 years ago, quite frankly. And it's tough. It's that in of itself is a grind. I don't know about you. I don't know about you. You seem to be okay most of the time, but
yeah, well, trust me, it's a facade because I'm definitely, especially the back pain, it's there. It's a daily thing, but I do stuff to mitigate that, and I can't let it keep me off the mats. Nothing too serious. If it's just dealing with some aches and pains, I can do it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, this past week or so has been the first time in since January where I could pretty much say that I'm 100%. And that's very rare. And it's unfortunate that, this tournament that was just recent the other day, I would have liked to have competed in that, but with these injuries, I didn't feel like I got the amount of reps that I needed. And I certainly didn't do myself any favors with nutrition because I need to compete at that 154 level, not, where I'm currently sitting at 160. And,
that'd be easy to get there.
Yeah. It's harder than it used to be, but it's not impossible for sure. Do you ever discriminate against training partners? Not racially discriminate.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Do you ever get a feel for the room or maybe get a feel for a certain guy and you're like, well, I don't know if I should go with this guy because it's not going to be a roll. It's going to be a fight. Do you ever feel that way?
Yes. And, I'll be honest. I'm not a big fan of, and this is just me personally. I'm not disparaging other people from doing it.
Sure.
But on an open mat situation where you have, we have people come in from schools all over the area. If I don't know a guy, honestly, I probably won't roll with him. And it's not anything personal. It's just at my age, for me, the most important thing is to be able to get on the mat, right?
The next day, right.
The next day. And some purple belt from another school, maybe they don't train the way we do. Maybe they go a lot harder. Maybe, cranking a wrist lock is amongst training partners over there is completely, fine. I don't know this guy, so I don't know how it's going to go. So a lot of times, I'm very observant of everyone at the club, and, pretty much there isn't anybody at our club that I won't not roll with. There are definitely people that I'm more cautious with, and it's not because of anything they're being malicious or, purposely trying to hurt anybody, but
right.
Some people are just, strong and sometimes don't know their own strength, and maybe they explode into techniques that, I wouldn't want somebody to explode into me on or something of that nature. But, I have like I said, at our club, everybody's super respectful and everybody's pretty much on the same page. So, I don't have too many of those folks that I train with on a normal basis that I wouldn't roll with, but I definitely understand the sentiment.
Sure. Yeah. I find myself, I won't refuse to train with anybody, but if I'm hurt, I will, and unfortunately I've been hurt for the past, except recently I've been hurt for 8 or 9 months. So I've had to be very cautious on who I roll with. It's just, not for anything personal, but I do observe how certain people roll, and there are times where I'm like, I can't go with you. And it has nothing to do with size. Even when I was hurt, I would still, if I saw Keon was available for a roll, for example, I'd still grab him. And, Keon's he's got at least, 120 pounds on me, I think, or maybe about maybe 100, but you know, or maybe some of the bigger purple belts. Like it's not a size thing for me. I just know, I know who's safe and who really, you know, who's a bit out of control. So I've had to be, you know, a little, especially when I'm injured, discriminate, in that way. You know, you just never know with some people, and especially, you know, when they don't have nearly as many responsibilities, it's they have a lot less to lose than somebody like myself. If I get, you know, if I can't move my arm or shoulder, that's a big deal in my normal everyday to day life.
Yeah, and there's no shame in that. I mean, we have guys who, you know, compete at the highest levels. And by the way, just the gentleman that you mentioned earlier, Keon Wilson, this is a guy who he's a former NFL player. He's been training with us less than a year, I believe.
Yeah. Just
went out to Vegas for Master Worlds and won double gold at Blue Belt.
Yeah.
He won the ultra heavyweight division and the absolute. This is a name that people better get used to hearing, because
the absolute, isn't that belts don't matter?
No, they do an absolute at Blue Belt.
So what's the difference between absolute and
So if there's an absolute, that's anybody, any belt, any size. I don't believe they do that at World Masters. I could be wrong.
Okay.
I think they just have an absolute in every belt level. But that being said, he did win the Blue Belt absolute and the ultra heavyweight. And this guy is, you know, there was no doubt when this guy stepped on the mat that he was going to be a world champion one day.
Yeah.
At probably every belt level that he makes it, I would assume.
Right. Yeah, he's you know, speaking of him, it's really something else to see. Like I've always been athletic. You know, when I was younger, I could run really fast, like a mile like in 4:30 or something like that. I was pretty athletic, but it's really something else to see somebody that just is different in that regard. And when you see somebody that is truly used to be a world-class athlete, it's different. It's completely different, and people just don't really realize that there's sometimes it goes just beyond, you know, hard work and trying your best and all of that. There's just people out there that you want to call it genetics, whatever the case may be. They're just physically, they are superior athletes at whatever level or weight that you want to, you know, make those comparisons to. You know, I was just watching, you know, a couple days ago, or a couple of weeks ago at this time, the World Championships, and to see those level of athletes, it's night and day compared to, you know, a state or somebody who competes nationally. It's really not even close.
Yeah, there's levels to everything, right? And it's like, you know, we've trained with some guys on high levels, but then there's levels, you know, there's the 1%, right? And then there's the 1% of those 1%.
Of that 1%, right.
Right. You know, and, you know, grappling sports, you know, obviously the financial rewards, even with mixed martial arts, the financial rewards are nowhere near what, you know, more traditional sports like American football or even football overseas or basketball or baseball, that those sports, you know, the reward financially is just so much greater. If they were on even playing fields and we were to see like some of these NFL and NBA super athletes decide, hey, I want to do judo or I want to do BJJ or I want to go into mixed martial arts, that level, you know, these guys with their athleticism just and translating it to these sports. I mean, we've already seen it, right? I think that there's a couple of guys that were, you know, played in the NFL for, you know, that maybe they weren't superstars, but, you know, they made rosters, they played games, and have went on to have high levels of success in MMA. I think the first like real superstar from MMA that we've seen from the NFL is like Greg Hardy.
Yeah.
I know he's not a popular person, but, you know, the guy hasn't been training mixed martial arts that long, and just using his natural athleticism has got him by this far already. And who knows how good he'll be, and how good is he going to be 5 years from now if he's still fighting?
Yeah. I mean, he's got age working against him, unfortunately, but yeah, I do agree that for as great as the athletes are in the UFC, I still don't think the best athletes in the world are in the UFC. So, you imagine if you got some of the best ones out there, competing at the UFC or other grappling events, what would that look like?
Right.
Now I do think globally for judo, it is a little bit different because some of the country's best athletes are doing sports like judo, especially when I think of like the Georgian team or maybe even, well, certainly Japan is their best. Right. Their best athletes could be doing judo. Smaller countries like Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, like their best athletes could be doing judo. And even Russia, you got a segment of the Russian population, or a segment of the athletes that are just fantastic, incredible athletes.
No, absolutely. And those countries make it a little more, lucrative for their athletes to actually compete, where here in the U.S., if you're a stellar athlete coming out of high school and, your choices are, I could, take the path to the NBA or a path to potentially get to the NFL or the UFC, the UFC is not going to be able to compete with that today. If in the future, if this, the financial rewards are on par and someone has an interest in martial arts, and these guys do start going that route, like you said, we'll see that level just escalate quickly.
Yeah, completely agreed. Now, speaking of athletes and people who may have superior or do have superior genetics compared to us, just regular people and such, I sent you an article earlier about this idea of Boyd belts. And
yes.
There's a video that the Gracies, Henner, and I can't remember the other guy's name.
The Kieran?
Yeah, they're very charismatic. I like them a lot. I know a lot of people talk, for whatever reason, I don't understand it, that duck rap about them. But they really are very charismatic, energetic, passionate people. And years ago, they came across, or I came across a video that they did on how to roll till you're 95 years old, or how to transition to getting older in jiu-jitsu. And one of the topics that they came up with is this idea of Boyd belts. So basically, when it comes to effort and rolling with somebody, anybody that's 10 years younger is a belt per se, and somebody who's 20 pounds heavier is also another belt. So, for example, I'll give you a perfect example here. There's a, I don't know if I want to use his name, but there's a fellow that's getting promoted with me. He's really good. Or that guy, I'm sorry, that got promoted with me. He's really good at jiu-jitsu. He goes all the time. Hell, he'll probably listen. I'm talking about Rambo.
Yes.
And that is his name. No, it's not that Rambo. There's a guy at the club. His name is Rambo. I'm assuming that's his real name. If it is, that's awesome. I mean, that's like, can you be named? That's like the second greatest name ever compared to Dick Butkus. That's the ultimate name.
I wish I could tell you that was his real name, but that was a nickname given to him. His first class, he came in and put on a camouflage headband, and our instructor immediately called him Rambo, and it stuck. So that's, yes.
Yeah, maybe his real name's Dexter or something, or Wolfgang. I don't know, but he's Rambo to me.
Yeah.
But so when it comes to the Boyd belts, Rambo is he's now a blue belt, but we've been equal in terms of, if you want to call it rank in white belt. I don't put much stock in stripes. I mean, it's important, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But he's like what, 10, 15? Certainly at least 10. He's got to be 27 years old, and I'm starting to approach 45. And I got to tell you, from that Boyd belt standpoint, it feels, even though he's not nearly as skilled as you, I have to put as much effort into my roles with him as I do with you, because of that youth and just his energy and strength and flexibility and all of that. So I was wondering if you had a chance to read the article and what you thought about that concept, and whether or not you think there's any validity to that.
So I'm familiar with that article from years ago.
Okay.
So yes, and it's 100% true. And Rambo is a prime example. Rambo, he trains with his cousin, who also trains with us, Tony, who's a purple belt.
Oh, that's his cousin? See, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I thought they were just like best friends. I didn't know.
And those guys train together. I mean, they train together at the club, but they also train together at home. They're savage. Yeah. Those guys are savages. They're all, those guys, their trajectory for getting to black belt is at a much steeper incline than anybody. I mean, they're going to get there quick. All those guys are good. And they, the Boyd belt theory is 100% legit. Tony, for example, I probably got like 25 pounds on him, but he's got, I got 20 years on him in age. And although we're the same rank, with our belts, me rolling with him is like rolling with a brown belt. It actually adds a belt on to him.
Yeah.
And same with Rambo, right? So with Rambo being almost 20 years your junior, it's almost like he's already a purple belt.
Exactly. In terms of effort, and because I've rolled with him a couple of times, like, my goodness, I couldn't, I think I managed to do it once, just pass his guard. But that was for me, it was a Herculean effort. It was really just like trying to pass yours is a Herculean effort, and you have so much more experience and skill. But just the youth and the speed.
Yeah, you can't. Those are things that you can't make up or teach, right?
Yeah.
And going the other way, the same fellow that we were talking about earlier, Keon Wilson, that guy came in as a white belt, right?
Yeah.
And he went to a tournament, entered the open division, and tapped black belts.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Now just think about that. A white belt tapped a high level black belt at a tournament and made it to the finals. And had he had more knowledge of the rules and how to use the rules to your advantage, he would have won he would have won the whole thing.
Yeah, right.
As a white belt. So, but there you go. Even though he's a little older than most white belts when they start, that athleticism and the we're talking about a guy who's probably 230. I don't want to put any weight on you, Cam, but I'm gonna just say 230, just to,
You're being way kind.
Those 20 pounds and probably about 5% body fat, by the way. So
exactly right.
Yeah, so those 20 pounds are belt levels, right? So you could put like an experienced black belt in there who's 210 pounds, and here's a guy who's he's a blue belt now, obviously, but that athleticism and the 20 pounds. You could add belts onto there. Now you're looking at a strong brown belt at the least.
Absolutely. You're right. And that's another example. Me rolling with Keon it's the same energy output and effort as like me rolling with, Chris, one of the instructors. Yeah. I mean, obviously the skills level is way different, but in terms of energy and effort, it feels the same. It's just, such a challenge.
And the only reason it feels the same is because he's being nice.
Exactly. Right.
If he really if it was go time, he could Hulk smash any of us.
Yeah. I think Keon could literally, rip my arm from my socket. I mean, I think he could. It's disgusting as that is, but yeah, so it's a theory that I think also applies to judo as well. Though I would say I would say when it comes to quote unquote Boyd belts, applying it to judo, once you get past 30 years old, instead of every 10 years, I think it's every 5 years. In terms of speed and at least I've noticed that since I hit 35, because when I hit 40, I was nowhere near as fast as I was at 35, and even at 44, I'm nowhere near as fast as I was when I was 40. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
definitely
seeing the slowdown. Even though I'm doing the best judo of my life, and I feel like lately I've taken that next step in my development. But man, as far as athleticism, I'm really seeing a slowdown. I have to be smarter and more technical and just more savvy.
Yeah, no, you're right. The decline comes much more rapidly once you hit that 35, year old, 40-year-old. Yeah, it's not like every 10 years you're getting slower. It's every 2 years you're losing a little.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting to see, because I think when it comes to judo competitions and masters competitions, I think judo has it right. They spread those divisions out by about every 5 years, and I don't think jiu-jitsu does that. Is that correct? Except for the big events.
Yeah, I'd have to research it more, but I believe that the Masters Worlds that just happened, I think it was every 10 years, maybe. I would have to double check that.
So I think for jiu-jitsu, every 10 years could actually work, because obviously it's mostly on the ground, but I don't, in judo, if it was every 10 years, that would be totally unfair to somebody 45, going against somebody who's 35. That would just be crazy. And I know a lot of smaller judo tournaments, you really don't have a choice, because very few adults actually show up to compete. But so those Boyd belts, I really do like that concept. I think it applies to judo. I think the weight aspect of it also applies to judo as well.
Yeah, for sure. We've all done randori with somebody who's got quite a few pounds on us, and where normally we would be able to move somebody around with your kazushi, your grips or whatever. Somebody that has that much weight on you, and you can't do anything with them. So it's like, it seems pointless sometimes.
Now, we're both about the same weight, more or less. We're in that range, and certainly the same age. Do you tone it down, regardless of rank, in both judo and jiu-jitsu? Do you tone it down when you're going with somebody that you've got 30 pounds on, let's say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the same concept like I was saying earlier about rolling with a lower belt. If I'm doing randori with someone who's 130 pounds, and I take a nice overhand grip on them and just snap them down, or yank them, circle out or whatever, that's not something that I'm normally going to be able to do with someone like if me and you are going, right? Someone
right
close to my size. So realistically, it wouldn't make any sense for me to do that to someone that I outweigh by that much. So I try to gauge my game not only according to their belt level, but also their size and even age sometimes, right? If I'm going with somebody younger than me, I know that they're faster than me. So I might use my gripping to kind of mitigate some of that speed, but I'm not going to overcompensate by trying to overpower them, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. And what's funny? I don't know about you, but in my experience, nobody that's got 30, 40, 50 pounds on me and up in judo has ever gone light. At least that's how it feels anyway,
No, I think what it is they get used to playing a big man game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like, they can't just all of a sudden become super finesse technique player when they go with you. They're used to, taking big man grips, maybe like the underhook to the belt grip, or that over the top back grip. and once they've got that on you, especially with, like you said, with the weight differential, not much that we can do at that point. So, yeah, you're right. Whenever you go with somebody bigger, I try not to be that guy. It's rare that I'm that much bigger than anyone, but if I'm going with somebody that I have a little size on, I still try to play my game and not.
Oh, did I lose you? Joe? Joe, what's happening? Where'd you go? No, don't leave me. Joe. Why did you go, Joe? Why? I guess he just lost connection there. Very sad. Because we had so much more to get to. Alright. I'm not sure what happened, but what was left on the agenda that I wanted to discuss with Joe, since he has departed us, is some of the misconceptions and really flat-out bad statements when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And oftentimes when I hear this kind of stuff, it's usually coming from judo guys. And I don't know why. Well, I have an idea why. I've always maintained that there's a segment of the population that really believe the Gracie family hoodwinked the entire viewing audience when it came to UFC 1, claiming that it was Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and not judo, what they used in the octagon. Gosh, we're talking about, what, 25 years ago at least? And it seems ever since then, at least on, so many internet forums and such, there has always been this judo versus BJJ debate. And now, there's two things that I do agree with the judo side on this argument, is that one, there wasn't anything that Royce Gracie did in UFC 1 that was uniquely Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And to be fair to the detractors out there, it definitely was all judo. There wasn't anything, and I've said this before many times on the podcast, there wasn't anything that Royce Gracie did in those early UFCs that was uniquely Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Everything that he did, you could easily find in a judo textbook. You could learn in a judo class. There wasn't anything unique. It was all judo. That much I agree with. And I also agree with another point of contention, which I'm going to get to a little bit later, is that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu does not teach or practice takedowns and throws in a very effective way. Now, I want to clarify, that's just been my experience in my own club and some of the other clubs that I've visited over the past 20 years or so. And I'm not saying that there aren't jiu-jitsu clubs out there that have good takedowns and good throws. I know there's one, the one that Travis Stevens is associated with, and I can't remember the name of it. But I know that many of their jiu-jitsu students are Shodan level judoka, in my opinion, from what I watch them do randori with Travis and moving around and stuff. They know what they're doing, and I know there's a lot of clubs out there that are like that. I apologize for that notification on my phone. Moving along. And I would also say that there are blue belts and some purple belts at my club that have never actually taken a real throw in their lives, or even have an actual reliable takedown. I'm not talking about double legs either, because that's just, that's not the best takedown to use when doing gi training. And I'm specifically just talking about gi training at the moment. And to be fair, I'm not talking about everyone, but I've definitely come across some people at my own club that's literally never taken a fall, and they're not white belts. So the criticism coming from the judo side of things with those 2 points, I think are fair and accurate, but that's where I stop with my agreement, just with those 2 points, because there's a lot of nonsense talking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as, basically just judo. That's what BJJ stands for. I don't agree with that, and I want to put some perspective on the sport, starting with the fact that I think that detractors out there have to understand and realize that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a very different sport from judo. It's just because they do a lot of ground techniques and some of the submissions are the same. It's a completely different sport, where its focus is to allow the ultimate amount of freedom on the ground to either submit or dominate your opponent just by points. I mean, there is a point system that I'm sure many of the detractors are not aware of, and even if they are, they just look at it as inferior, which is a shame because the point system is based off of advancement of position, and the ultimate position to be in within the context of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is mount and rear mount. And this is where I get frustrated with a lot of the detractors. And I used to be this guy. I'll put it out there. I used to be this guy many years ago. And I've seen this guy this kind of guy, quote unquote guy, come up into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu clubs, into our clubs. You know, sometimes people come into jiu-jitsu and they feel, from judo, and they feel like they've got to defend the belt in a way. They've got to defend the honor of judo or something like that. And so what will happen is a judo guy will come into a Brazilian jiu-jitsu club and, you know, they'll do Nawaza or whatever, and they'll get like Keisa Gatami or Yoko Shio Gatami and just kind of hang out there for maybe, you know, three minutes out of the 5-minute roll and not really do anything. And then they just kind of walk away, you know, in their own way, just thinking that they've done something. And quite frankly, you didn't. I mean, just because you hold somebody in side control for 3 minutes, it's meaningless in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's meaningless within the context of that sport. And then the jiu-jitsu guy will compliment you, shake your hand, and be like, hey, man, you're really strong, which, if you don't know, in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, if somebody tells you you're strong, that's almost a reason to go. That's an insult. That's not a compliment. So judo guys, be aware of that. You don't want to be strong. All right. Where was I? So, yeah, I've seen judo guys do this over the years, where they hold somebody down with all their effort without attempting a submission or without attempting to improve their position. And it's like, you know, then the roll ends and it's like they walk away thinking that they're victorious, that they accomplished some great feat. And the fact of the matter is that you're not impressing anybody if you do that. Now, don't get me wrong. There's certainly value in maintaining and securing a position before you go for a submission, but you know, in judo, obviously, well, actually not obvious to anybody who's from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you can win if you hold down your opponent for 20 seconds. And in judo, you can, you know, if somebody's got like a scarf hold, Keisa Gatami on you, and the person on bottom wraps their leg around your leg, that's considered a broken hold down. In Jiu-Jitsu, that's meaningless. That doesn't mean anything. And, you know, there's a lot of times where judo guys just turtle up. And in jiu-jitsu, that is not a good position. You're basically exposing your back. And, of course, you know, you got the judo guys that come in there, you know, they turtle up like and they're like a rock and they're very hard to move. But it's like when I see that, I just think to myself, dude, you're not impressing anybody here. You're not actually doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You're just doing judo in a Brazilian jiu-jitsu class. And then conversely, a lot of times, I've over the years, I've read stories where like, well, you know, I had this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt visit us at our club, and I didn't see anything special there. He didn't do anything special with our black belts. I mean, they all held him down for like 20 seconds, and that was that. And it's, again, it's completely different sports. And to that point, I think even a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt would have challenges in a judo competition if he formed his entire strategy around getting the person to the ground and holding that person there. It's very difficult to win on the ground in judo. And the time allotted does not allow for the kind of freedom and movement that you often see in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You don't get that freedom and movement in judo competitions. So as a result, when it comes to judo, you develop grapplers that are very fast, that are very explosive, and that's a unique skill set in of itself. And there are many jiu-jitsu practitioners that are fast and explosive as well, but that is typically not how the game is played in jiu-jitsu. And as a result, the level of detail of securing techniques like Sankaku Jime or Juji Katami and different things like that, the level of detail is so much more in depth compared to what I've seen in judo in many clubs. It's night and day. So the techniques may be the same. An arm bar is the same in judo as it is in jiu-jitsu. A triangle choke is the same in judo as it is in jiu-jitsu, but the way that you get there is completely different. And I don't think that those differences are respected by some people in judo. Now, with regards to judo, I am strictly talking about IJF judo, but there's also freestyle judo. But even in freestyle judo, you cannot do leg bars and heel hooks and or knee bars and leg locks and things like that. You cannot do that in freestyle judo. So when it comes to sport grappling, I do believe that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has the most freedom and deepest level of skill set. And look, I don't want to get emails from people, well, you haven't been to Japan, you haven't seen what we do in Japan and in this and that. That may all be well and true, but again, in Kosen judo competitions, there are no leg locks, there are no heel hooks, there are no straight ankle locks in Kosen judo. So you essentially have an entire area of the body that's left untouched by submissions. And in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they allow that stuff. They allow a lot. They allow a lot of things at black belt level that, goodness, I would be very uncomfortable with being put in those type of positions because I just don't see them as much. And every time I do a roll with anybody that's blue belt level and up, I usually tell them, look, if you see a straight ankle lock or a leg bar there, feel free to take it because I need to learn to defend against it. And that's true because in judo, you don't have to worry about that stuff. You don't have to think about where are you leaving your limbs, how are you, positioning your body so that you don't get caught in those kind of submissions. Also, let's not forget that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu allows wrist locks as well, and I've been caught in a few of those. So my overall point is that if you want to be a well-rounded grappler that adheres to the least amount of rule sets, the only way you're going to become the most well-rounded grappler, in my opinion, is through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, unless your judo club trains leg locks, heel hooks, wrist locks, and that kind of thing. But, but ultimately, the rules of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu just create a different type of grappler, just like the rules of judo do. And as I mentioned earlier, there are plenty of fantastic people who are in judo that don't need leg locks, heel hooks, and ankle locks to completely dominate a person on the ground. And within the context of judo rules, they are fantastic grapplers and a force to be reckoned with. There's no question about that. But Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is as different of a sport as baseball is to cricket. I mean, that's probably the closest thing I can compare it to, just because they swing some sort of a bat and they throw some sort of a ball, it doesn't make it the same game. And it's just a different game. So I really don't understand why there's all this jealousy and hate toward jiu-jitsu. It is bringing people on the mats that would never do any sort of grappling sport. And that's where judo as a whole in this country has failed. The adult practitioner has been alienated by judo. I have been saying that for almost 3 years that I've been doing this podcast. Adult beginners don't matter, generally speaking, in judo. But in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they throw those doors wide open and they're treated like gold. So anyway, I'm not going to delve further into that because I've covered that many times over the years. So I think I'm going to end the podcast on that note. So if I pissed you off, insulted you, got something wrong, or overall you just want to tell me how much you hate my guts or tell me how much you love the show, feel free to email me at judochopsuey@gmail.com. I encourage all of my listeners to follow me on Instagram, which is at La Vida Judoka. You can also follow me on Twitter at La Vida Judoka. And since it's football season, I'm doing a lot of posts on Twitter with regards to football. And with that in mind, if you are on DraftKings and you want to challenge me to a head-to-head matchup in DraftKings for football, feel free to also look me up at La Vida Judoka. You can find the Facebook page if you search for Judo Chop Suey Show. And you can also find me on Facebook as well if you search for David Roman. Just if you do, please send me a personal message saying that you are a listener to the show, and I'll add you as a friend, because if you don't, I'm just going to ignore you. Your friend request will just end up in friend request purgatory, where I don't delete it, but I don't acknowledge it either. Too many Russian bots that I have to sift through. So thank you for tuning in. On my next episode, I'm probably going to cover the Brasilia Grand Slam, which is happening, let's see, the weekend, I believe, of October 5th. And if I'm not mistaken, Teddy Vernier is going to be competing, which is great. I can't wait to see that. So anyway, I'm going to cut things off here. I'll leave it at that. So I hope you all have a great day. I hope you all have a great rest of the week. Train hard. Stay safe out there. And until next time, I'm out.
Oppan Gangnam Style.